Hey there, Pastor Eric here from Connection Church in Columbia, Tennessee. The message that you're about to hear, we truly believe is going to be a blessing to you. So our request of you is if it does bless you, that you'll take and you'll share it with others. We want, like everything, for people to be connected with Jesus. Our desire is for you to be connected with Jesus. Our prayer is that you would be connected with Jesus. But if you share this message with others, they'll be connected with Jesus too. God bless you.
Well, good evening. I don't know if you could tell, but I'm not Brian. I have the same amount of facial hair, but I'm a little bit taller and have a whole lot less children. I had to sneak that in there. I have 0 children. I have 3 chickens and a dog. They take up most of my time, so our time. I'm married. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Caleb. I am usually the one playing guitar and singing, so I put myself behind a table instead of a guitar tonight. Pastor Brian is off with our students, so be an extra prayer for him. He's been sleeping with them for the last, just last night, right? They were here. Was it all the boys or just the?
Just some of the middle school and high school boys.
Okay, just even some of the middle school boys alone is worthy of prayer. I worked with middle schoolers for a long time, and they don't know how to shower. No, but he asked me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, we're going to start this new series. Do you want to take the week that I'm at DNOW? And I said, sure, I'd love to. And then I got to the chapter that he'd given me, and it's John 10, and I had about 1,000 points that I could have gone in this with this passage. I was like, I got to narrow it down to like at least 100. So hopefully I'll have us out of here by tomorrow morning. Yes, laughter is good for me. I need the laugh-formation. No, so I'm super excited for tonight. We're going to be in John 10, so if you guys want to turn over there, we're going to be in verses 1 through 30, but I'm not going to read them straight down. That's just kind of the section that we will be in this evening. So we've been in this series of, focusing on the one, and Pastor Brian has kind of been showing us that I am statement plus the relationship statement. That is, every time Jesus makes the, I am statement, he follows it up with a relationship statement of him and his Father's relationship. And so I have 2 I am statements tonight. He's given me 2. I'm like, thanks, Brian, appreciate it. But they go hand in hand. And so the first I am statement that he makes in this passage is, I am the door to the sheep. And then the second is, I am the good shepherd. And the relationship statement that Jesus uses in this section is, the Father and I are one. And so as we kind of dive into that, you'll see how they go hand in hand, how they really tie together on how he can make that claim of being the good shepherd and being the door to the sheep, because he and the Father are one. So I want to start just by reading these first 2 verses in chapter 10. And it says, truly I tell you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. So as I was reading through that this week, and I was kind of bouncing ideas off of Pastor Eric and Pastor Brian, something that really stood out to me, and it's pretty clear, is that the shepherd is the only one who enters through the gate. Like, he's the one that's going to come and open that gate and get his sheep. Thieves, people that aren't supposed to be in that sheep pen are coming over the wall. Like, they're climbing over trying to get in and steal what's in there. So I had this thought of, if where you're heading requires you to climb over the wall, you may want to look at who you're following. Like, you may be following the wrong leader if you're kind of going, I need to climb over that wall to get to where I want to head, because it's the gate that the shepherd will bring us in and out of. And so, if anything is trying to enter your life that hasn't been filtered through that gate, filtered through Jesus, it probably doesn't belong there. And so we really need to kind of examine ourselves and go, okay, Lord, show me if I've allowed things into the pen, in with me and you, that aren't supposed to be here, that haven't been filtered through you. And then there's often times where we'll just pull things over the wall, right? Like, there's things that we try to sneak in the back door. Like, man, I really, that flesh side of us, because I really want that in my life. I really want to, I want that in the sheep pen with me. And the Lord's going, yeah, but that didn't filter through me. Like, we've got to filter things through me. And if it doesn't filter through me, don't start pulling stuff over the wall. And so that's just kind of in those first 2 verses. As I was reading, I'm like, well, that's good. I like that. So then when we get to verse 3, it says, the gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought all his own outside, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will never follow a stranger. Instead, they will run away from him because they don't know the voice of the strangers. Jesus gave them this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. So as we read through that, as we see that, it's such a beautiful picture of knowing the Father's voice, of knowing that when he calls, like we know that voice, and we go, yeah, that's who I'm supposed to follow. That's who I'm supposed to run to. But especially for me, as I was reading that, I had this thought this week of how often, though, does that stranger's voice at least pique my interest? Does the stranger's voice come in and I go, oh, who's talking? Who's talking today? Is it myself? Is it somebody else? Like, is it bad advice? And then we see this aspect of the shepherd leads the sheep. Like he's out in front of them so that he can see everything that's coming in front of these sheep. And so there's that promise there as well that Jesus is out in front of us. As the shepherd, he's leading us and he's guiding us and he's directing us. And so if we're listening to that voice, there may be times where we're like, I don't know if we're supposed to head in that direction. But if I'm listening and I know that's your voice and you are my shepherd and you're leading, I'm going to follow you. I did find it interesting that, it says they did, Jesus gave them this figure of speech, but they didn't understand what he was saying. And so I was like, okay, well, there's something significant to that. Because in that time, shepherds it's a very common job. Like it wasn't like he was giving them something that they had never heard before, never seen before. And so I was like, well, why didn't they understand? And I think that, at least my conclusion and some of my readings and kind of bouncing ideas off of people, they didn't understand because he was telling them something so familiar and common, right? They're following Jesus, who is claiming to be the Son of God, who is the Son of God. But in their time, he's claiming that, he's saying he's the Messiah, all this stuff, and they're going, it's not really a profound teaching, right? Like we know what shepherds do. We understand, like we know sheep follow the voice. So why are you kind of telling us this great, commonality? And I think for me, I oftentimes do that as well. Jesus will reveal something to me and I'm going, okay, but that makes that's common sense. Like, where's the grand revelation, right? And I think this is such a great reminder that sometimes Jesus doesn't give us this profound mic drop thought. Sometimes it's just the logical, common thing that we go, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Why I should absolutely follow that. And so so they don't understand. And as we keep reading in verse 7. Jesus said again, truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep didn't listen to them. I am the gate. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. A thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come so that you may have life and have it in abundance. So here we see Jesus kind of reiterating that. So he moves from the shepherd. So, those first couple verses, he's saying that the shepherd comes in through the gate. The sheep follow the shepherd. And, they're like, okay, that's great. Like, we understand that. But they didn't understand him. And so Jesus says, okay, let me rephrase this. I'm the shepherd. I'm the gate. I'm the one that the sheep enter in and out of. And so he's kind of becoming a little bit more bold with that statement. And so, he's showing us that everything that comes in and out of our life must be filtered through Jesus. We think that sometimes, I know for me, it's real easy for me to trust God with the big stuff. The stuff that's completely out of my control. I'm going, yeah, absolutely, you have that, because there's no way I can control that. It's the little stuff that I'm like, yeah, I can do that. That's no problem. Like, I can pull out of my driveway and be safe. I can drive to work and not have an accident. Do I ever thank God for that? Right? Do I actually genuinely thank Jesus for guiding me to work? It takes me 12 minutes. It's a straight shot from my house to here. But it's so common, right? Like I don't always, quote unquote, trust him with that or allow him to lead me or even say, Lord, am I supposed to go a different direction to work today? Like, should I not go the common way to work? Is there somebody that I'm going to encounter on my way to work if I go the back way? Or do I stop off at a different coffee shop because I may run into somebody that needs to see me today? Do I go to a different Kroger for groceries? hello, good morning. I'm going to fix that before that becomes obnoxious. And so, I think it's that where once we start to filter everything through Jesus, every step we take, every person we talk to, every text we send, every phone call we make, and go, Lord, is this the conversation I'm supposed to have today? Like, I think our lives start to look different. We start to see things through the gate of Jesus, right? And we go, well, that's exactly the direction I'm supposed to walk, because I know that you're the gate. He also, makes the claim that we see here that if anyone enters by me, he will be saved. So Jesus, as the gate, is the only way to heaven. We live in a society and a culture right now that is teaching, many ways to God, right? Many different directions. As long as you're a good person, or as long as you kind of follow these set of rules, like, no, Jesus is the gate. He's the only gate. And if you're not walking through that gate, then you're not saved. And so, that was a bold claim. It's a bold claim today, because you'll get labeled as, narrow-minded, or, things like that, or, exclusive, right? Like, Christianity is so exclusive, like, why would I be a part of that? And so, we go back to that whole aspect of, I didn't say it, Jesus did, which feels like a cop-out sometimes, right? Like, it's hard to say that, but how are we going to argue with Jesus, the Son of God? And so, John 10:10, I think, is a verse that we often have heard, we've quoted, but I think we skip past that first part to get to the second. We want to talk about the abundant life, but we don't always want to focus in on the steal, kill, and destroy. Or if we do it in such a way to where it's kind of like, yes, he's out there, but Jesus gives us that abundant life. But we see that thief comes only to kill, steal, and destroy. I think only is key, because it's not like he's just going to change his mind, right? He's not going to come in, you're not going to invite him in. He's going to go, oh, you're actually a good person. Like, I'm not here to kill, steal, and destroy you anymore. Like, we could actually be friends. Like, let's hang out. Like, no. Like, his only job is to steal, kill, and destroy. Satan hates you. It's not just a dislike. Like, it's not a strong dislike that's like, okay, well, he followed God. I guess that's a bummer for me. No, he despises you. And I think that's something that sometimes is hard to remember. Like, everything that he does, he sets out to steal, right? To kill, just to destroy. He's crafty and cunning. He doesn't give a giant neon sign, right, that says, if you walk this way, it's going to steal, it's going to kill, it's going to destroy. I think he kind of often, he's not going to tell you that one more scroll through social media is going to steal your joy. Right, the comparison game that creeps in of like, oh, I wish my life looked like that. Like, that's people's highlight reels. Like, we've talked about that before. Like, I call it the square life. Like, if I'm living in your square, but let me see the outside of your square. What child is screaming and running over here, around what dog has gotten into something, or like, or more serious things at times. But it's like we put these pictures of what our life should look like. Jess and I were watching. Jess is my wife, by the way. I don't know if you've met us, but we were watching a show the other day, and it was a couple, and they were kind of in this argument, and she said something. She's like, well, you looked so happy here. And he said, why don't you zoom in on her sunglasses? And so she zooms in on the sunglasses, and the guy who was taking the picture, like, looks miserable. And he said, we had just gotten in one of the biggest fights we had ever had, yet we were taking pictures to make it look like we were having a great time on this trip. And I was like, how profound is that in this secular TV show that I'm watching that is understanding the destruction that social media has on us? It's stealing our joy. Like, it's stealing that aspect of, well, my life doesn't look like that, so I must be doing something wrong. He's not going to tell you that, one more hour of news is going to steal your hope and peace. Right? We've been watching the Olympics, and we've been falling asleep to it, which is great until the 10:30 news rolls on and you wake up to some terror. And I'm like, what in the world's happening? Like, when you're saying, I'm like, okay, turn that off. Like, and so, but you don't realize, like, the more that you kind of subject yourself to that, it's one thing to be informed, but it's another thing to allow that to drive away your hope and your peace. Like, there is no hope for the future, right? Well, absolutely there is, because we have Jesus. We don't think about that He doesn't give you the giant sign that small little flirtatious conversation at work could lead to a relationship that destroys your marriage and your family. That kills that. If he was that obvious, he would be easily avoided. Yet we hear these stories of Satan working his way into these situations that we go, I never thought that would have happened. That's because it's that one little piece at a time. He doesn't come with the giant, like, I'm going to kill you. You're going, oh yeah, I should avoid that. And so I think that's something that we have to remember in this verse. But then Jesus comes and he gives the promise of life. Satan comes to bring death and destruction, but Jesus came to give life and give it abundantly. This does not mean that every aspect of our life is going to be rainbows and butterflies. I think we can all attest to that. And so there are hard times in life. But the fact that we have been given life through Jesus, that he has offered us eternity with him, like that's the abundant life that he's speaking of here. So verses 11 through 14 say, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. The hired hand, since he is not the shepherd and doesn't own the sheep, leaves them and runs away when he sees a wolf coming. The wolf then snatches and scatters them. This happens because he is a hired hand and doesn't care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. So as I was reading through that and kind of just asking the Lord, okay, where do you want us to go with that section of this passage? And I asked myself, okay, well, what makes a shepherd good? And then he lists what makes a shepherd good. He knows his sheep. He's willing to protect his sheep at all cost, and he leads his sheep. So as I was thinking through, I was like, well, there's a lot of shepherds in Scripture. And so the one that came to mind was David. And so if you'll turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17, we're going to read verses 34 and 35. So this is David right before he goes to fight Goliath, and he's talking with Saul. And it says, David answered Saul, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it, struck it down, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur, strike it down, and kill it. I don't want to be a shepherd anymore, I know that. Because I may be as big as a bear, but I'm not fighting a bear. But my thought as I read that, I went, if that's David, who is an earthly shepherd, right? David is chasing down a lion and a bear to save the one sheep, right? He's probably got a ton. Yet that bear takes that one sheep off, and he's going, no, I got to go get that sheep, and I'm gonna get it from that lion or that bear's mouth. If David's doing that, how much more is Jesus going to do for us? So as I continue to kind of read about shepherds, I don't think we can talk about it without talking about Psalm 23. This psalm is titled The Good Shepherd. And so this was kind of, I had a plan, and I was texting Pastor Brian and Pastor Eric this morning, and I said, hey, I think I'm shifting gears, Saturday morning. They're like, oh, good, you've arrived. But as I was falling asleep last night, I was like, well, I want to go a different direction with this. And so I just kind of broke down, there's 6 verses in this psalm, and I just kind of broke down each one of why the Lord is the good shepherd. So verse 1 simply says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Some translations say, I have what I need. When we shift our perspective to the Lord being everything we could ever want or need, then we can truly say, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Verse 2, he makes me lie down in green pastures, he leads me beside still waters. This is showing us that the Lord gives us rest and protection. The reason a shepherd would lead his sheep beside still waters is because sheep are not the smartest animals. They will dive their head right into that water, and with all of the wool, if it's rushing, it grabs it and it just takes them downstream. And so as a shepherd, you have to know, I need to lead them by still water, so that when they go to drink it, they're not swept away by the rushing water. I think that's so true for us at times where we dip our head into something figuratively, and next thing we know, we're downstream and we're going, how did I get here? And it's like, that's not where we used to take, I worked in student ministry for a while, we would take kids to the beach, and we would always tell them, you see that roof down there, like if you're out in the ocean, you see that roof on shore, like you've gone way too far. Like swim back to shore and because it's so easy to get swept. And so, that's why the Lord as our shepherd will lead us to still waters so that we don't get swept downstream. Verse 3, he restores my soul. He leads me on paths of righteousness. The Lord has restored us and leads us in the right direction. Verse 4, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Like we were saying earlier, we will walk through dark times in this life. That's not, we're told that through many aspects of Scripture. James, says when you face trials. It's not if, it's when. This is even though I walk through the valley. Like we'll have the valleys that we're walking through. The Lord is with us. That's the promise of this verse as well. Something else that's interesting, I'm a little bit of a nerd, so I like to research a bunch of stuff. But if you research the rod and staff, like the rod for a shepherd, they're both tools. They're both different tools that the shepherd uses. The rod is a little bit of a smaller club that was used to kind of fend off predators. The staff was your standard shepherd staff with the hook, and it was used to guide and kind of pull out of trouble. And so these oftentimes we read these passages and we don't really understand because we're not shepherds. We don't see shepherds on a regular basis. But when you research that and you go, oh, the Lord is my shepherd. His rod and staff comfort me. It's because he's protecting me, but he's also guiding me and kind of pulling me back, going, hey, it's not the right direction. Okay, cool, I'll go this way. Verse 5, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. We may feel surrounded at times, but we must remember that our good shepherd is with us and inviting us to sit at his table. The shepherd's anointing was to keep parasites and other bugs and stuff out of the sheep's eyes. It was used to kind of cover that, to keep the eyes protected. It was also used to kind of keep their wool to not get caught, like in thickets. And so again, like as we hear that, as we know that the Lord anoints us, he's protecting us. He's keeping us from getting our heads into things that don't need to be in. And then verse 6, only goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The Lord is pursuing us with goodness and mercy, and he's promising us a life of eternity with him if we accept it. So he's been established as the good shepherd, but as his sheep, we must know his voice. Use that tab very well. There we go. So if we go back to John 10, we see several different passages in this chapter that show us about hearing the voice. John 10:3, he calls his own sheep by name and he leads them out. John 10:4, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. John 10:14, I know my own and my own know me. John 10:27, my sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. We must get to know his voice so that we may follow him when he leads. So I don't know about you, but I often ask the question, okay, Lord, but how do I hear your voice? How do I know your voice? So I think that's where the relationship statement of this passage comes into play. So John 10:30 says, the Father and I are one. We're not Jesus. We're not God. We're not the oneness with God. But we are able to come into his presence. We are able to talk with Jesus and get to know him more intimately. And I think that's what he's leading us towards here. There was an intimacy that Jesus and his Father had, and we must strive for that same intimacy if we want to hear his voice. Colin Adams, who's on staff with us here, he runs most of the tech booth. He's in the back a lot of times on Sundays. But we were in staff meeting a couple weeks ago, and Pastor Eric actually said this quote last Sunday morning. We were talking about how do we hear the voice of God. And Colin dropped a bomb on us as we're sitting in the staff meeting. And if you know Colin, he's not a talker. So like when he speaks, we all go, okay, Colin's talking, like we should listen. But he says, we don't have a listening problem, we have an intimacy problem. It's not a problem of hearing, it's a problem of how close am I to you to hear you. And so sheep don't learn the shepherd's voice overnight. I was actually watching, I was gonna show it, but I decided not to. There's a video, if you go to YouTube, you can just type in like sheep knowing the shepherd's voice. And there was a video, and I think they're in another country, But there was 3 young ladies that all walked up to this sheep pen, and they're hollering, and they're saying the exact same words. They're hollering, calling. There's a couple that kind of poke their head up, and then they go back to eating. And then the 4th is the shepherd. And he walks up, and he starts calling, and immediately every one of those sheep heads pop up, and they come running to the rock, like fence. And, I sat there and I watched that, and I was like, they didn't learn that overnight. That shepherd didn't just walk up and go, okay, this is the voice that you're supposed to hear. It was a daily hearing the same voice, saying the same things, knowing, okay, that is my protector, that is my provider. That's the voice that I come to when they call. Once we learn the voice of the Lord, once we've been intimate with him and spend that time learning what his voice sounds like, then we must be obedient. And I think that's what scares, at least for me, that's what scares us the most, right? Because we don't ever know what God's going to ask us to do, where God's going to ask us to go, how he's going to ask us to move. But I found this quote a couple weeks ago from A.W. Tozer. And he said, why are we so terrified for God to speak to us? It is because we know that when God speaks, we must either do what he asks or tell him we will not obey. There is no middle ground. When the Lord says move, we got to move. Or we tell him, I don't want to. And so I think for a lot in the global church, not necessarily Connection Church, we're comfortable kind of hearing what the Lord's telling someone else and going, okay, that's good, I like that, I'll take some of that, I'll take some of that. We'll make this kind of perfect little guide for our life. But that's not what Jesus is calling us to. He's calling us to hear his voice and to walk and obey him. And so as I kind of wrap up this evening, the challenge that I got out of this is, what voice am I listening to? And what voice are we listening to? What shepherd is calling us, and which one are we following? But then also, how am I striving, or am I striving to be intimate with the Lord so that I can hear his voice more clearly?